Mhm. Hi, good afternoon. Today is Wednesday, January 11th at 7 p.m. We're here to discuss utility rate increases. After numerous studies and work internally, we've done some analysis of where our revenue projections are and revenue structure and revenue requirements for all of our three utilities, and have come to the point where we need to review our rates and propose new rates. So we're going to talk about the structure of our funding structure of the enterprises, and we'll talk about what the requirements are and what the proposed rates are. Joining me tonight is Mary Ann McQueen, who's council member, and part of this, what we hope for tonight is part of this presentation is going to be a dialogue, and we have audience member joining us tonight, and they'll be able to ask questions as we proceed through the presentation. We also have folks joining us on Zoom, and we'll accept questions from Zoom on this topic. So.
Thank you, Josue. And as I understand, this will be available after the presentation for people to watch. How can people watch it later?
Great question. Right now we're streaming live, and at the conclusion of our presentation, the video will stay live, and we'll continue to promote it on our social media channels and replay the presentation through Channel 5.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Also, I think that this is something that will be coming to council, and we will have at least 2 readings of the ordinance. And so there'll be more time for people, if they have questions, to ask at council meetings, I assume, or to get in touch with you. So thank you for putting this together.
Thank you.
And how about if you start in on talking about, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, well, let's dive right in. So I'm going to share some slides that is appropriate. And Lace, let me know when you want me to share the screen through Zoom. So when I joined the team in 2019, one of the concerns that council had was, are we doing enough to create an affordable community and affordability, and not just buying a home, but also what is the cost of living in the village? And are we doing enough to manage costs? Right, there was some questions of how effective our utilities were, and primarily because there was data points that we were not capturing. There were a lot of folks that were concerned about what infiltration and inflow, and how
data points.
Data points. Well, data points is what are those numbers that you're tracking that give you an understanding on how well the system is operating. And for example, one of the letters that was waiting for me when I joined the organization was a letter from the EPA stating that we were exceeding our wastewater treatment numbers, that we were taking on more water than our plant could process. And so the data points we needed there was to know, well, what's our capacity, and how does that capacity compare to water rate of flows on a daily and monthly basis? So my first year, we put in place data numbers that we wanted to collect ongoing, so that we understand what's happening at our plants, and are we prepared to handle those flows? Mm-hmm. So we've put together data points to understand, okay, how effective our utilities are, what are the challenges we're facing. So in sanitary sewers in particular, we were dealing with a lot of clean water that shouldn't be going into our wastewater treatment. So first, from 2019 through 2020, we worked on a lot of infiltration and inflows. So the data points were important, and we've done that for electricity. So now on a monthly basis, and I think many of you would think that, oh, well, this is just should be standard practice, and we've made them standard practice now, where our finance team and our public works team are reviewing data points to make sure that they understand what's going on. So another example of how we track the data points, we look at how much water we're producing versus how much is being billed, and we calculate water losses. And now we've started to share that with council on a monthly basis, and it's a good performance measure on how efficient our enterprises are being.
Excellent.
So so let's jump in. So The present challenges we have now is that in 2019 we were concerned about the affordability of all of our utilities, and part of that was driven after years of steep rate increases for many years. There was many residents felt a sticker shock when we built our water plant and had to increase the rates significantly to cover two primary cost drivers: the debt service, which is the principal that we're paying on the new plant, and the interest rate, and that comes out to about $400,000, and then a year, and then the staffing that we need to run that operation, and those are two cost drivers, and these things are getting expensive over time. So 2019, we were concerned about the cost of living, and so we did a deeper dive on looking at what's driving our costs, looking for operating efficiencies, look for ways to improve the operation. So among them we were able to reduce sanitary flows by 40%. And all of that was driven by infiltration and inflow. Clean water just finding its way into our wastewater treatment system. So that's one cost savings measure. We looked at water losses, we looked at electricity losses, and we reached a point where we've exhausted the cost saving measures. Whatever we find now will be small incremental improvements that we can make. One of our success stories was, Marianne, if you remember Renergy, we used to take our biosolids to Renergy, and Renergy, they were in lawsuits, and we wanted to look for another way of dealing with our biosolids. And initially, we were expecting an increase in cost because we were losing energy. We found a way to still meet our requirement to deal with biosolids in a way that's cost effective. So we ended up buying a presser, a sludge presser that dewaters the biosolids. That allows us to reduce the weight of the biosolids so that we can transport it to Brown County landfill at a lower cost.
And so I suppose that people would like to move on rather than.
Yes, I can talk
continue to
about.
give examples of what we've done to get to the.
I can talk. I can talk about biosolids all day.
Yeah.
So, but we'll move on. Other matters that are affecting us are hyperinflation. We're going into 2 years where inflation has been above 6%, and what that's translating to is increased costs to materials and supplies, and increased costs in wages, because we want to keep up with inflation so that we can retain employees, so that that hyperinflation is turning to a tougher labor market, resulting in higher wages for retention and hiring new employees. Deferred maintenance continues to be a challenge. I think there's no secret that a lot of things just didn't get done, and we're playing catch up. One of those catch ups are at the end of December, we were still doing sewer realignment because we were trying to get more work done under a pre-negotiated price. So deferred maintenance continues to be a challenge. We still continue to do catch up, and that's just work that needs to be done. And we can't stop doing maintenance, because the minute we stop, things just deteriorate further. So we have to stay ahead of it. Other piece is little to no growth in utility customers. Where we have capacity, we have a water plant can produce 1 million gallons a day, and we don't have customers.
Spread a lot of costs over
Right.
the population that we have.
Right, and our customers are only utilizing 300,000. So we have 700,000 of capacity where we don't have customers to sell it to.
All right.
All right, so what are the revenue opportunities? Right, we got all these challenges. What are we doing to try to make the situation better? I think you've seen some of our successes. We've been able to get grant money to do the major infrastructure improvements that we know we've needed for several years. One of them is we've recently secured $1.2 million to replace 2-inch water mains in the village. These 2-inch water mains are particularly important because they're galvanized lines that eventually they need to be replaced. We will be required to replace them. So it's good that we've been able to secure this money, because this is money that we're saving our ratepayers down the road, because we're not using the utility water revenue.
Just to be, thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So on that, not so much about the 1.2 million, but those galvanized pipes, we, excuse me, we're going to be required to replace them eventually,
Correct.
soon, whether we get a grant to help offset the cost or not.
Correct. In 2024, we're required to submit an inventory of all galvanized lines in the village and a plan to replace them. So we're being proactive here, trying to get ahead of the mandate. 2024, we'll just need to have a plan in place to replace them. So this will help us get a bit along.
Right.
Other things. Okay, so. So to recap, revenue opportunities that we've been able to exercise are securing that $1.2 million for water main replacement. We, as many of you, as you came into the village, you would have seen that we have big piping outside. That's the result of us securing $465,000 for stormwater projects. That's to reroute a failed storm system along Dayton Street. So these are just examples. We're currently, one that you see that on the screen is, we have a grant application to the state OPWC for replacement of water meters. I think we've been talking about water meters for a good 5 years now and replacing those. So we've got a grant. I light a candle and hope that we get it. I think we have a good chance of getting it. We've recently implemented a stormwater district. We expect to raise around $100,000 a year for stormwater projects. So that's been done by council. And the one that's...
So where does this leave us now?
Yes, this leaves us to the last item on this list. It's exploring utility rate increases. And that's where we are. So any questions so far?
Writer, or is that your job you're doing? Or who's pursuing those?
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, we've put in the budget an allowance for grant writing. And so we were looking at hiring grant writing expertise, individuals that we can get. In working with our partnerships, particularly LJB and Choice One, we've been able to partner with these two engineering firms to help us write the grant applications. And so part of our success has come about strengthening our partnership with the engineering firms that we've done business with and leveraging their expertise to secure those grants. And so over the last 2 years, we've paid for engineering analysis so that these engineering reports will give us the information, the essence of what we need for a grant application. Many of these applications want to know what are the issues from an engineering perspective on what are the solutions and estimated costs. And so we've spent some money on engineering and grant writing with Choice One and LJB. Henry.
Just a short one. I thought reciprocal tax.
For the people, we need to have the mic so the folks out in the
I
public can hear.
thought reciprocal tax arrangement was also going to be discussed, what the paper gave. Not so?
Not tonight,
Okay.
Yes. But
sorry.
But Henry, to your question, yes, you're right, and I want to clarify why that's not being discussed tonight. And part of that is that the utilities have to be able to be self-sustaining. So they have to, the way that they support themselves is through their own revenue streams. So reciprocal tax would be something that would go towards the general fund.
And that is something that, thank you for your idea, which you had, what, about 10 years ago? That we probably, I assume we will be doing that at some point,
Okay,
but
yeah,
that's
no.
not for tonight's.
Okay, yeah, got the wrong information. Well, misread the paper.
Yeah.
You didn't misread it.
Yeah, no misreading. It is something that council will discuss, but not part of this utility rate discussion. Okay, so we'll jump right in with our utility rate discussion. And the first enterprise that I want to look at is our electric enterprise. And just to reiterate a previous point that I made is that the reason we're looking at utility rates separately is that each enterprise has to support itself. So each one needs a revenue adjustment.
And what are the enterprise funds? Just if you'd repeat them.
Yeah, so we have 5 enterprise funds, but the 3 that we're talking about tonight are electric enterprise, water enterprise, and sewer enterprise. And sewer is our sewer wastewater enterprise. The other enterprise that have been established are the stormwater, that's now an enterprise, and our municipal broadband. That's also an enterprise. So let's get started with the electrics. So first thing I want to do with electric is I want to review the process and methodology that our consultants use. We hire Courtney and Associates, who are consultants for American Municipal Power, which is as you all know, we're a member of American Municipal Power as a public power company, and Courtney provides consulting services for many of the members, if not all of the AMP members in Ohio. So this is their methodology. They did a billing statistical analysis, operational data, and looked through the financial statements and report. They verify the accuracy of the information. They also did their own revenue projections. So what are the revenues, energy sales, power supply requirements, the revenues at current rates, and what are the revenue requirements? The revenue requirements are how much money do we need to sustain and support the electric enterprise? So this is the methodology. This is a similar methodology that Courtney and Associates did for water and sewer. We hired them to do a rate study for all of the enterprises. So they follow the same methodology, and we wanted to ensure that it was the same consultant so that there's a firm methodology being applied by one consultant. So this is looking at our energy sales. So the reason why these numbers are the same for the next 4 years is because based on the statistical analysis for the past years, we've had little to no growth. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to share the screen. So there's no self-growth factored into the revenue projections, which that's leading to the no growth in energy sales. We do have some energy losses. Part of what drives that is street lights. We don't have a meter on street lights. There are a few other things that
So the village itself uses some
yes,
electricity.
yes, or street lights or traffic lights or street lights. There's multiple things that don't get built. They just get absorbed in the system. So those are accounted for. So these are the projected power supply requirements. The power supply is what we pay for electricity. As you know, we generate very little electricity of our own, and we have a 1 megawatt system out at Glass Farm. We pay a fee for that, but we're buying all of the electricity. And so that is the projected power supply cost requirements. Looking at, these are the average rates. These rates include readiness for service fees. So one of the things that we're proposing for rate increases is adjusting the kilowatt rate. The current readiness for service for the electric enterprise is $15. We're recommending keeping that as it is, adjusting the kilowatt rate. So these are current rates. This is what we expect to generate by our different customers. So residential, our commercial, and our large power. So much of our revenue is driven by our residential customer. That is almost 2.3 million out of the 4.1 million. So what are the revenue requirements? Well, again, the methodology is looking at cash basis, looking at historical data, power cost, supply cost, and current budget. There are some assumptions that are built into our model. One is a 3% inflation. So the proposed rates work if inflation stays at 3% or lower, which I know the feds are doing a lot of work to get the inflation down. So this is our revenue requirement.
What, that previous slide said transfer to capital improvement fund, when you explain?
Yes, so good question, Marianne. The way that we set money aside for capital improvements is that on the operating budget, we factor in an expense, money that we're going to put aside for capital improvements, things like running new power lines, replacing power poles, transformers, and whatnot. And that is part of our maintenance and improvement plan. We need to continually make investments in our infrastructure. So that's considered an expense out of the operating budget.
Right, and also, if you don't mind, is that transfer, or is it variable? Is it a percentage, or is there a dollar amount?
It varies by year. Typically, we develop a 5-year capital projects plan, and we itemize what projects we intend to do over the next 5-year period, and that sets the financial requirements to fund those projects. So many of them in the past have been matching funds for projects. I think that those have been on the water side. We've done a lot of those transfers in capital specifically to fund matching requirements for projects.
And I appreciate that because, see, I'm now in my 10th year on council, and I have seen a continuous improvement in things like this. I think when we first got on council, I'm not aware anyway of that kind of projection over that period of time, so.
And that's for the things that we can plan for. There are other things that
Yes.
the emergency happens and we need to solve them right away. But we also plan for emergency expense. So these are the revenue requirements. As you can see, our revenue requirement grows, and part of that is driven by our personnel cost. You see that number increasing from what we anticipate this year being 561,297 to 613,344 in 2026. Our contractual services are increasing. Contractual services are things that we procure from vendors. Some of the things that have included power pole replacements. There are a lot of poles that we've been able to get to, but there's others we can't, so we have to hire that out. There are power costs. You can see this number go down and then it goes up again. And part of what drives that is the long-term contracts that we have in place. If you recall, Marianne and Kevin, just last year, we were able to buy more renewable energy and we were able to get it at a lower rate than the market rate. And that's part of, we were able to do that because one of our energy contracts or two of our energy contracts were expiring. So that's why you see some changes. There are contractual obligations long-term. So just all of our costs are going up. What's the difference between our revenue requirements versus revenues at current rates? And that's what this chart shows for the electric enterprise. The first column is how much money we need. That's our revenue requirements. How much money we're bringing in at the current rate, and what is the difference? That's the revenue amount. That's the difference between those two. So the adjustment here on the fourth column, this is what Courtney and Associates recommend adjusting our rates to meet our revenue requirement. So the recommendation is 5.2% in year one, which would be 2023. By 2026, we need 6% revenue increase. And this is not 6% on top of the 5.2 that we're proposing. This is what total revenue we need to be. And the reason they did that, they set out the adjustment in that way is so that we could come up with a multi-year plan to implement that adjustment.
So give an example. So 2023, when this comes to, after it comes to council and becomes law, the electric rate will, based on the amount of electricity, will increase by 5.2%.
This is the recommendation from Courtney and Associates.
This is what we got. So then in 2024, will it increase again at 5.2, or will it just stay at that 5.2?
No, this is just looking at what revenue we need at that year. So part of the previous slide was looking at how our cost or revenue requirements and cost are changing over time. So in 2024, our purchase power cost is going to go down because some of our contracts are expiring, we'll be able to buy electricity at a lower rate, and at least that's the plan. And then in 25, we expect that rate to go up. And some of what's driving this are where are energy prices going into the future.
So for villagers who are getting the electricity, they'll see a bump in 2023 for electricity, but in 2024, it will stay the same, and then it will go up.
No, not quite, because what we're recommending, I'm going to switch tables here, because what we're recommending,
Excuse me, Josue, do you want to admit whoever's in the meeting?
oh, there's someone, Lindsay, okay, well, admit. The rates that we're proposing, Marianne, so I'll get ahead of myself here, just to give folks the big picture view. This is the proposed rates that we're proposing to council based on the recommendation from Courtney and Associates. So for electricity, we're proposing a 5% rate increase in year 1. And in years 2, 3, 4, and 5, we're proposing a 2% increase to keep up with inflation. So it's important that we have a small adjustment so that we can keep up with inflation, because inflation isn't going away. You know, we're going to have inflation year to year. So the 5% in year 1 will allow us to get pretty close to the 5.2% recommendation that Courtney and Associates have made. In the following years, as we do 2% adjustments, that would help us to keep up with inflation and also help us get closer to that 6.7% that it's expected to be needed in 2025. So that's where that's headed. All right, so I think that covers electricity,
Yeah.
which is one of the easier ones. Any questions from the public on electricity rates? Mitzi.
Can you share when was the last increase in these funds?
In electricity, the last rate for electricity was approved by council in 2019, and it went in effect in 2021. The water and sewers have not had any rate adjustments since 2019.
Approved in 2019, but didn't go into effect.
Well, it was approved for prior legislation, so there was an escalator approved by council. Yeah. So the last change to rates was in 2021 for electric, but water and sewer has not had a rate change since 2019. So there's been several years of no rate increases.
Are you getting ready to walk through the other two ones?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm going to wait, because I have more of a comment than a question.
Okay. Thank you, Susan.
I actually have a question, Alan Rainey. These increases, it doesn't matter whether we increase or decrease the amount of electricity or water we're using, it's still the rates would have to be the increases you're talking about, regardless of the amount of electricity or water. If like we reduced our electrical use by half, reduced our water use by half, would that affect what you're proposing?
It could affect our electricity, because our electricity is, we buy that through contracts. However, we have made commitments to buy these long-term contracts. So if suddenly we only use 50% of the power that we purchase, we have to sell that energy. And at what point can we sell it and recover our cost? So in short answer, if we were to cut our consumption, that doesn't mean that we won't need additional revenue.
In fact, in terms of the electricity, you correct me if I'm wrong, we have contracts that are 10 or 15%, maybe 20% less than what we actually use. So the rest is purchased from, what do they call it, off the grid or
On the market.
So there's certain flexibility in terms of if our use were to drop, but if it were to drop precipitously, yeah, that would probably be a problem for the electricity,
Yes.
because we're committed to these contracts.
And that's the same for water, that no matter how much we use or don't use, we still need a 10% increase?
No, for water, if we were to suddenly stop our consumption of water, it's not going to affect our cost structure, because we have fixed costs. We have staffing requirement and we have debt service for our plant. I think there will be some things that we will see some savings on, less electricity to treat the water, less chemicals, but that effect isn't going to be substantial enough to offset the fixed cost and the revenue loss that we would have if people stop using water. Rob?
It's Rob Hauk. In the event we had excess electricity beyond our contract requirements, could that be sold back to the
Yes.
market?
Yes, the AMP, American Municipal Power, has a trading desk that they sell our excess energy when we have excess generation, not just for the village, but for all of its members. And they buy energy for us on the market, as Marianne mentioned. And so if we do have excess energy, we'll sell whatever the prevailing market price is for that energy at that time. Okay, thank you.
This is Lindsay Collins on Zoom. What are you guys doing to ensure you're negotiating the best costs?
Insured for the power purchases?
Yeah, how, like the quoting process, how can we
Yes.
have trust and faith in the idea that you're getting the best possible cost for us?
Yes, we go through American Municipal Power, and typically we do a cooperative purchase agreements. AMP has created contracting vehicles or requests for proposals and other methods of getting bids for power, and we aggregate all the members. So one of the ways is through the volume of electricity that we're buying. So when we go out to the market, it's not just a small little village looking to buy power. We've got the purchasing power of the entire American Municipal Power Association negotiating pricing for all of us. So it's one way that we try to get the best pricing.
So it's a cooperative.
It's a cooperative, yes.
And so we pool all our towns and villages, cities together so we can look at different opportunities, different contracts.
Mhm. Correct. And in the most recent purchases we made, right, we brought council various opportunities. We had hydropower, solar power, and wind power when we picked the best rates.
Okay, good to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah, and this is Brian Hausch. I'll just jump in. I appreciate Lindsay's conversation as well. I think it's important to highlight that we do bring these to the council meetings and talk about it in public. But Josue, it also occurs to me that the thread of conversation kind of leads to maybe highlighting the other side of users. So you focused, or I think responded to, like, if we have less users, but at some point you should highlight the differences when we have more users for certain utilities and how that impacts costs.
Yes, and that was one of the points that was addressed by Courtney and Associates at the presentation, is what happens if you get more users and where does the affect most? In electricity, because our costs are proportional to the power that we buy, the value of adding more users is lesser than in water and sewer, because as our consumption goes up, our cost goes up because we have to buy power from off the market. With water, that additional customers allows us to spread the costs more among more people, more folks. And in terms of capacity, well, if we have more water customers, we don't have a whole lot of capacity to build out because we already have existing capacity. We have a water plant that can produce 1 million gallons a day, and we're producing 300,000 on average. So we have a lot of capacity that if we were to get higher volume customers or more customers, that would help the water enterprise spread the cost among more users. Brian, did I catch did I answer your question properly?
Yep, I think that's good. Yeah, I think, because there are some differences in the utilities. So I think that's good, for folks to understand. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And that's the same case for our wastewater treatment plant. It
Right.
already has existing capacity. And in fact, with the water, with the infiltration and inflow reductions that we have done, we've increased that water capacity or processing capacity.
All right.
All right.
Now what are we gonna look at?
Well, now we have two more enterprises to look at, and those are water and sewer. So let's jump in with sewer. The methodology has been the same with the sewer system. So we'll jump right into what the revenue sales are going to be. So we have little growth. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sharing my screen here. So these are the average rates by class, what residential customers are paying, commercial and large power. Am I in the right presentation? Yes. So these are expected revenue requirements from 23 to 26. So you see that revenue required increasing. And what's driving that again, it's personnel services, contractual services, supplies. And we want to steadily make contributions towards our capital funds, making those improvements that we need. One of the things that you would have seen this year is sewer realignment projects. We've done some video inspections of sanitary sewers, and they're in bad shape. And we join a cooperative purchase agreement to secure better pricing on pipe relining. So we've done pipe relining, sewer relining for the past 2 years. This year, we were added with the support from council. We were able to leverage negotiated pricing to get a better rate to do more sewer relining this year, because that contract goes up this year, and we wanted to exercise a right under existing 2022 contract.
What's the impact of not relining the sewers?
Well, there's we have found pipes that are at catastrophic state of failing, and so if they fail and they collapse, the cost to fix those sanitary sewer system goes way up, because we're required to essentially cut into the ground, remove the pipe, and replace the pipe by connecting the two ends that are not broken. So the cost is significantly higher. So the relining sewer systems is a cost-effective way of keeping up with maintenance. And I think most of you that I see in this room are on social media, and there were folks in very cold days complaining about some of the smell or the noise that the sanitary sewer system. So these guys were out in the cold this year and getting some of that sewer line work
What
done.
about the debt service? Is this from improvements that were made to the sewer plant?
Yes.
And when will that, do you know?
I don't have the year. I have the paperwork, so I can't think of it at the top of my head, but that's information. It's a while.
Not in the next
It's a
5
while.
years.
Well, our water plant payments are scheduled to go out to 2042. So it's going to be a long time. So another
That's the
20 years.
Clean water.
Yes, that's the clean water. Yes. And I think we got the financing around the same time. And so, so it's another 20 years on our water plant. But I will get you that information, Marianne. Okay. It's a long time. So here are revenue requirements. Here is the comparison of revenue requirements against what our expected revenues are at current rate. There's some bigger differences here than there were in electric. So just from 2023, we need an additional almost 14% in revenues. By year 2026, we need a total of 24% increase in revenues. So these were the recommendations from Courtney and Associates. We looked at breaking up that 24% increase because it's a significant increase in 1 year. So we're proposing to break that rate increase up over the next 5 years. So in first 4 years, do an incremental rate adjustment of 6%. Through year 4, and that gets us to our 24% increase. And then in year 2027, fifth year, to go into a smaller adjustment to keep up with inflation. So that's how we're proposing to get to the recommended revenue adjustment over a 5-year period. Okay, any questions on sewer? Okay, so now we'll go into our water presentation. Okay, on the water side, the analysis is the same methodology. We'll jump right into our revenue requirement. This is our revenue requirements. And so that as well is increasing for the same reasons as the other two. We've got personnel, cost increases to contractual services, supplies and material, and the debt service continues at the same rate. We also need to continue to make those transfers to the capital funds to keep up with maintenance. There is opportunities that we're looking at to reduce this cost in capital funds by securing grants. So we continue to work on grants, and as we get better at our process, and we think that we could bring in some more grant money for our services, but that's not money that's guaranteed. So we need a plan for those costs. So what's the difference? That's the comparison for the next 4 years. The rate adjustments that are recommended are significantly higher. So in year 2023, we need an additional 31.8% in revenue increases. By year 2026, the Courtney and Associates estimate that we will need an additional 41% of revenues to keep up with our revenue requirements.
So I have a question. Over the last several years, our costs been going up, but our income hasn't? Is that the
Correct.
case? And so how have we been paying for that deficit?
The deficit, we've been using capital reserves to make up for the revenue that we're not collecting. So for the water projects, we've been using capital reserves. So matching funds or for grants or the projects that just don't have any funding stream, we've paid for those out of reserves.
So, and for those who don't know or may remember, we passed our budget at the end of December, I guess, which had a deficit, and some of that deficit, or maybe most of it, came from the
Reserves.
the enterprise funds that we were our costs were more than our revenue.
Correct.
So this is part of how we're going to be changing that.
Correct, right. We need the increase of revenue so that we're at some point we're going to run out of cash reserves.
Yeah.
So when we,
Not
yeah,
be a good thing.
and that would not be a good thing. So we need to continue to put money away for those projects. One of the projects we're working on that we're bringing to council is extending the water line, building capacity along King Street. That's a troubled area, and we were able to secure a good pricing for it as part of our $1.2 million work. And so that's an example of projects that they're not grant funded. We have to come up with our own cash to pay for those improvements. So council will hear that. We'll have that contract before them in next meeting. So how do we propose to get to 41% increase in revenue? Well, we can't do it all in 1 year. So we're proposing to break it up over the next 5 years by having a 10% increase to rates in year 1 through 4, and then a 2% increase in year 5. And that will get us.
This is the steepest.
This is the steepest increase, yeah. And again, we haven't had a rate increase to water since 2019. So there are some catching up, if you will, due to inflation, inflationary effects to our structure, and this helps address that and bring in the additional revenue that we need.
I'd like to make a comment. Susan Stiles, it's clear that you need to raise money. And I know that you have some costs that can't be changed. There are some that probably you can. I personally think it's unreasonable when we're in a period of time that we're trying to support of a diversity of people in our community, a diversity of income levels. For us then to be looking at raising our rates that high, I think 2 to 3% a year is probably more reasonable, because people are experiencing inflation right now. So it's not just the village that has this problem. People's dollars, I heard on the news, people are paying $1 more for eggs a week. So people have all of these things. We have a school system that wants to pass a levy, which will be, more money. So I think we need to think very carefully on what we're doing to this community, what we're doing to our most vulnerable people in the community, and what really can they stand. And although the village may need 40% on water, it's like you've gone years of not doing it at all. So you can't expect within a few years to recapture all that. And that's just my thought, that we need to look at capping the amount that you should be asking each year, because that's just incredible to me, the amount that you're proposing.
Well,
Thank you.
And I recognize, I think we sitting up here recognize that it's a hard thing. Unfortunately, the village government, any municipality, is not like the federal government. We can't take on debt. And unless we can find ways to bring in more money, which I think Josue has been demonstrating he's works to do, it doesn't seem, it's hard to find any wiggle room.
Well,
But
that's a great
my-
point. I wanted to
Certainly
support Susan.
interested in looking at that.
So this is Lindsay on Zoom, and I want to back Susan up on that I totally understand a cost increase and the necessity, but we do want to maybe understand like what creative solutions are being put forth to potentially offset that, because people on fixed incomes, a lot of people may be retired on Social Security, and I'm in the bracket of younger families in Yellow Springs. I love living here. I've lived here 15 years. I'm fortunate to be able to do that, but I know a lot of young families won't come here, even if they want to, because they just can't afford it. But when we want school levies to pass and we want all these, productive things to be happening in our community, we do need younger families to move here. And unfortunately, we're pricing them out. So are there other creative solutions that we are doing to potentially raise money that we could do rather than just saying raise prices? Because that feels like the easy button. And I understand, I'm in supply chain. I fully understand. But is there anything we could do to offset that to keep people in our community?
You're both right. You're both right. We've been working at increasing the efficiencies. Those are creative ways that we're trying to reduce costs. The grant seeking activities that we've been doing are resulting in us having to spend less of our own cash reserves to make those improvements. So that $1.2 million that we got, that's for work that we'll be doing this year. That's an example of those creative solutions to reduce the cost on ratepayers. And so we'll continue to explore those opportunities. So we're not leaving opportunities on the table. We're going to pursue those things, and we're putting in the hard work to secure those opportunities. I think that's the most impactful solution that we have available to us, is to pursue every grant opportunity we can for water services.
Alan Rennie again. Let's assume that for some reason the answer to this is no. This can't happen. What happens to Yellow Springs if this doesn't pass, if this doesn't happen?
Well, we have a legal obligation to deliver services to our residents. The things that we would have to do is continue to defer maintenance, and that's kicking improvements down the road. I think you have seen what that has meant in our village, so we have to be very careful about what we forgo in doing. But that would be among the first things to go if we do not get a rate adjustments, is we would have to do less of.
It seems in a way between a rock and a hard place. And I'm not saying that there aren't creative ways of solving it, but I think that in the past councils and past village governments have deferred maintenance, which is why we are where we are. So I'm sure that council and staff is open to any kind of ideas that we haven't thought of. And we could have community conversations about that.
Yeah, I think I'm not trying to spin anything, but if I were, I'd probably introduce the phrase right size, because I think that's what we're doing in terms of, what our needs are compared to our current revenue. They're not. The revenue is not the right size. And if, so Josue, I'm going to toss this to you in terms of a question. Once we get through these 3 or 4 years of increases, then are we going to be at a steady 2%, for example, cost of living adjustment going forward for rates?
I think it would be prudent, and I think this goes in line with what Susan was suggesting, having modest increases that can help us stay ahead of rising cost. So, 2019, we wanted to get a better understanding of what their cost structure were. We were responding to the sticker price of recent rate increases, and so we held off for several years. I think now that we will, once we catch up, we should be prudent in our assessments and our rate increase to have smaller rate increases, so that we're not hitting our residents or ratepayers with a higher increase because we've missed periods of not having increases. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I have a question then, I think maybe Pam. So I think you talked about how we have enterprise funds so that the money that for the water, for example, comes into that fund and then the expenses go out of that fund. If somehow or other we found I guess the question, so we have the general fund. If we decided to, I'll just take an example, not have the swim pool, shut the swimming pool down, which would be, I don't know, $80,000 or
about $100,000 operation.
Could that revenue loss then go toward the enterprise funds? In other words, if we stop doing some of the things that we're doing, stop plowing the streets, stop mowing the grass.
So as I understand your question, could we use any available funds in the general fund to help offset costs and the enterprises? Yes, it's not recommended because it shows you would have an unsustainable enterprise. But certainly, if we were in a bind and a challenge, and council wanted to use its revenue, general fund revenue to offset those costs, it can.
And just,
that would mean not doing something.
Not doing something else, right.
And that's.
If we were going to explore that option, how would you determine that?
We need to stop her. Pam's, we can't just have folks online just jumping in. Pam's got his hand up, and I'm just going to ask this to everyone who's online. Please raise your hand or allow us to acknowledge you before you jump in. Lindsay, I do appreciate your comments, but there's someone else waiting, and we just want to be fair. But I will end my comments quickly by saying, we could debate whether shutting down the pool is the best example, but that is an example of something that we're deciding not to do because of the public good that does. Cleaning snow off the streets, that's a public good. Yeah, we could not do a lot of things to avoid these expenditures, but then we have issues with all those other things that we're not doing. To some evidence of our being sensitive to this is that we have not been raising these costs over the years. It seems like a right thing to do until the time comes to pay the piper, which is where we are now.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Pan, I see you have your hand up and you've had it for a while, so I've asked you to unmute there.
Hi, Pan Reich. I have two statements and two questions quickly. I just wondered if perhaps we could consider a little more of a balanced compromise, considering that we haven't had any rate changes for so many years, than rather trying to catch up in only 4 years or so with such huge 6% and 10% increases, that we could look more at 3 or 4% over more years would be less painful, especially during these times where we're suffering from such high inflation, which we're actually expecting those inflation rates to decrease, where these rate increases wouldn't be so painful. And then one question is, I understand that we have the capacity for 1 million gallons a day, and we're only using 300,000. Have we actively pursued selling the other 700,000, or at least a percentage of it, to other communities to try to bring in more revenue? Then my second question is, we have a lot of residents who are struggling financially, and one way that they try to survive is through growing their own food with gardens. And I feel it's really unfair that those folks have to use more water than most people, and they get charged sewer for water that's not going into the sewer. They have to water the fruit and food, that vegetables that they're growing, and you're charging us, when we do that, sewer that we're not using. And we've requested separate meters, and the village is rock hard steady refusing to even consider that. I think especially for our citizens who struggle financially and are trying to survive and stay in our village by growing their own food, that should be an option that would help them to survive these rate increases with the sewer. And then my last question is, we have too many streetlights. If we turn half of them off, would that save us significant money? Thank you.
Okay. All right. You had 4 questions, Pan. I'll get to the easier one. Sewer charges. And for folks that are using water, but that water does not make it to our sewer system, we have a program that we call the Summer Sewer Program for folks that are power washing their homes, watering their gardens. We provide a credit on sewer charges for folks that have water that doesn't make it to our sewer. So that's something that we already offer. We certainly don't want to charge a customer for something that they're not using. So sewer will be one of those things that if, I'm happy to explore that further, how we can improve our sewer credit system, so that we can help those individuals who, or just be fair, if you're not putting the water down the drain, then.
So how does that work?
So our Summer Sewer Program, there's a process on our website, and there's an application. What we do is we compare water consumption on non-summer months and compare how that consumption varies for summer months when folks claim to be using water for gardening their plants. For folks that use water, say for power washing, we provide a service where we read the meter before the consumption and then read it afterwards, and then we deduct the difference that they use for that activity. So those are ways that we do it. That's 2 examples, and so we're certainly happy to explore more of that. We want to be fair in our process. For the piece about selling excess water, we have discussed this internally. We've thought about things. Well, what does selling water for bottling companies look like? We do not, it's probably an industry we don't necessarily feel keen on supporting, but the cost at which we sell our water is not competitive for the municipal water that some of these companies are buying. There's also another element or another unique situation that the county has, that there's a lot of water in the county. Fairborn has a water plant, Xenia has a water plant. Now Greene County is building additional water plants to provide water to residents in the township. So we have a lot of water capacity around us. I think at one point the village had entertained conversations about buying water from Springfield. So there's a lot of water readily available in our area, which makes it difficult to sell water. On the street lights, we have made improvements to our street lights. We've moved from these halogen lights and other high energy consumption lights to LED lights. And so that's a way to reduce our electricity consumption for lights. There's other things that we're working on to reduce the cost burden on some of these things. One of the proposals that we recently talked about at council was moving to a pay-to-charge model for the EV stations, which, by the way, we have the new EV charger stations outside, and we'll be coming to council for authorization to move that to a pay to charge model. So that's a cost that the enterprise and the general fund.
Electric fund.
That would help the electric fund, yes. And that's something that's a strategy we're going to build out as part of the electric enterprise, because the future is in EV. There's no denying it that electric vehicles are the future of transportation, whether it's an electric moped, a motorcycle, a scooter, or a car. Electric motorized transportation is the future. So we want to further our infrastructure for the enterprise to be able to be prepared for the future, and moving to a pay-to-charge model is that. And on the fourth item, consider a compromise, lower rates over the years. That's a conversation that with council, and if council wanted to look at something at a different model, then what we presented, we're certainly open to it. We're not taking anything off the table. We're following the recommendations from Courtney and Associates and try to create a reasonable time frame to make these adjustments.
There is one other thing that we haven't talked about so much. So we have what is it called? A utility roundup. We have a roundup program where, I forget, what's the percentage of people that are on that? It's not even half.
No, it's not half. And
So if you are on that program, which you can just sign up easily to do it, your utility rate, you're charged for the next dollar up, which means at the end of the year, an individual customer pays about $6 more. But it collectively, let's say, for example, people who do have some money, collectively, if they said, well, okay, we'll pay $5 or whatever, that could be a way to increase that utility roundup fund to help people who are really struggling. So that might be something, a way to generate income from those who can, for those who.
Yes, and this year we made significant changes, in 2022, we made significant changes to make the program more accessible to more residents and with a higher amount. So we doubled the subsidy. We went from $200 a year to being able to do $400 twice a year. So that's up to $800 in subsidy assistance from a previous $200. So certainly there's room for improvements in that program, other ways of raising money to help what Susan and Lindsay reference our most vulnerable residents.
Is that a hand?
I think that's my mouse.
Okay.
Yeah, that is my mouse.
Okay. So Josue, this is backing up just a tad and also attempting to address one of Pan's questions. What meters are we currently planning to replace?
The water meters. So we have a grant application. So water meters. We're upgrading our electric meters. So we've got a Tantalus system that would allow us to do remote reads. We work with Enveca to create a fiber backbone for our readers out in the community. So that would help improve the reading speeds and help us get more data on our consumption.
So a thought, and I'll say this and we can go away from it, but I was intrigued by Pan's question because I lived in Orlando for a while. And of course, in Orlando, in the neighborhood in which I lived, having a pristine lawn was like a premium. It made a difference. There was a lot of competition. So I I actually built my own irrigation system, but I did have a second meter, for irrigation. So just to Pan's suggestion, what Pan did say is that the village has been resistant to that. But instead of starting off saying, let's put in a second meter, could we consider, whereas we're going to replace most or everyone's water meter, for those folks who want to keep their old meter sort of to be their secondary meter for gardening and whatnot, one that just gets read for consumption, not sewer, and then we have the more modern one doing the whole household potable water. Could that be a consideration? And again, what kinds of things might need to be considered to make that happen?
Yes, I think that's something we have to talk through internally in terms of the challenges we will have with the meters. Right now, one of the reasons of moving or upgrading our meters is that about half of them are located in crawl spaces and places where difficult to access. They're age infrastructure, so they're old meters, that their reliability over time becomes questionable. So I think if we were just to rehab or reuse these meters, there'd be a question of what the reliability would be after a certain period.
Okay, great. And so again, I just wanted to acknowledge that as a potential possibility, but just wanted to talk about the real world ramifications.
Applications of it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Susan?
This isn't going to cut down on water necessarily usage, but you might consider some sort of program that helps people get water barrels. And look at the Rain Brothers, because we have water barrels that we're collecting about 1,000 gallons of water, and it has a system, so it has pressure. And so instead of people then having to use the village water, you know, I mean, you don't have to collect 1,000, you can collect a lot less, but there are nice systems out there. And maybe if there was a grant program or something that the village participated in and could help people at a certain income to have a rain barrel that they can use it for their gardens, for washing their car, spraying their house, whatever.
Yes, that's an excellent idea. One of the things we talked about with the team is how do we create a program where folks that are retaining their stormwater could offset their stormwater fees. And so those are things that are part of the code, that the legislation that council approved, and we're going to implement a program or a process where we make that possible. Mitzi?
I'd just like to say, you know, that's part of an educational program, or you're talking about different ways we can save. I want to go back what Susan said and, you know, address our population that is really going to be impacted by this high increase. And I have to say that I think if we can cut it like it's 333, so it's not so high, coming within a year, I would hope council would consider that.
To that point, Josue, I know that the contractors that did the report,
Courtney and Associates.
I was going to say Collins, but Courtney. If we change the formula, if you will, and start looking at down the road, I would imagine that they would have a different set of numbers for what energy costs are predicted to do over a 10-year period besides just the 5-year period. So would we have to not go back to ground zero or step one, you know, but would they have to develop a report that looks at the real cost? Because we could decide that, okay, this is what's going to happen over the next 5 years, but we're going to take 10 years to collect that money. Well, that second 5 years, things are still happening that we are not addressing.
Correct.
So it you know, it could be a smaller number, but the period of time we're talking about could be considerable longer as well.
Right, and some of the things that we're talking about are what are the trade-offs that we're willing to make for lower increase in revenues. And so from the table that we looked at, where are costs increasing? So a lot of them are driven by the contractual services and the electricity. Yes, there's a power cost there, and I think that we could look at a longer horizon for where energy prices are going to be and find ways, I don't know, how far out we can think about energy prices. But the trade-off that we will need to make earlier than reaping any benefits or cost savings through longer-term contracts will be, what are we going to stop doing? Because something's got to stop doing, right? Like we don't have the cash to do all the work that we plan to do. And so a lot of that is in capital expenditures. Those are in improvements that we're looking to do in the system. So I think extending the runway, if you will, of implementing these rate increases, what are the things that we would have to stop doing and what's manageable over a longer period of time?
So I think that's the bumper sticker for this year. What are we going to stop doing? Because we're, and please, I'm going to use a word that might not sound good, but don't take it the wrong way. We're gambling this year, by doing deficit spending and depending on our revenues. And the whole plan has to work out, or we're going to have to make some drastic changes at the end of this calendar year. So the plan right now is workable. We are accepting the fact that we're $1 billion over budget, but we're willing to get through by doing our reserves and making these other adjustments. And it's like a system. If we change too many things, we got to change some other things to go along with it. So just consider that we're the way things are looking now. Break even would be we get to pay for everything and we don't have additional debt at the end of this year. Making changes along the way will change what the outcome will be. And again, at some point, worst case, it will be literally what will we choose not to do.
Mm-hmm. And there are some things that we may not have options to not do them, and we would either have to borrow money to do them.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing which people may or may not be interested in is looking at other ways of saving and not using so much water. For example, toilet flushing. I think I've read flushing the toilet is the biggest use of water in most households. So I'm not going to go into the ways that one can avoid that, but I am doing that at my own home. And my water use is really
I think the audience is intrigued.
I mean, people might not want to think about that, but, don't take showers as often, or don't take, I mean, there are things that can be done at that end, as well as the rain barrel thing.
I've invested in higher efficiency toilets.
Yes.
So have I. We've got dual flush, higher efficiency. One of our toilets, the previous owners left a gallon jug inside the tank. So that decreases the amount of water. Displaces the amount of water that you're
And
doing there.
shower heads and things like that. And that's another way, I think, that sometimes there are programs where people can get those things, lower income people we could work on getting things like that for lower income people.
Yes, and one of the things that we talked about, I believe in 2020, we had envisioned utility roundup 2.0 that would do energy audits and weatherization and other energy saving opportunities. I think in 2022 we were fortunate that we had a Home Inc. secure grant to make energy improvements in the homes, and that was money that council used money to create the matching funds for that. So I believe that we used $12,000 to secure around 200,000.
Right.
And so there are programs like that. We have talked about them in the past, creating utility roundup 2.0. And I think pandemic and other things have gotten in the way to bring those programs to fruition. But I think it's with these increases, I think we're going to have to look at those savings opportunities for our residents.
Right.
So I appreciate the conversations we've been having, the difficult conversations, and I know council will be looking at this. Is there, is it time to talk about when, or are you finished?
Yes, I think I'm finished with my presentation. We are running at 1 hour and 12 minutes, so I think we can talk about timeline. What are the next steps? Next steps, council will have its first hearing on the 17th. That's Tuesday, January 17th. The rate adjustments are scheduled for 2 hearings. Both of those hearings are opportunities for the public to weigh in on the plan, bring your comments, your questions, suggestions. Those are not the only ways to provide comments. I know every council member is open to receiving communications via email, phone calls, like I am. I oftentimes am loitering at Tom's and at the Emporium and speaking with folks on that. Kirk has not trespassed me, neither has Tom, but we make a really good attempt at making ourselves available. So reach out to us in all the ways that we are available.
Can we at least mention when we'll broach the subject of paid parking?
That hasn't been scheduled for discussion. So I think that's a matter for council to start scheduling that. I know Planning Commission yesterday was one of the, we didn't go deep into those topics, but Planning Commission is also talking about what policy issues they're going to be looking at. So I think that there are, we should discuss what those timings for those issues.
And for the record, I'll just say this disclaimer. Whenever I mention paid parking, I'm envisioning a system where the visitors pay for parking, residents get some sort of a sticker that we would like for you to buy, but a sticker that says, I'm good, I don't need to pay for parking, whatever. So it's not about burdening residents, but it's taking advantage of, the hundreds of folks who show up. And if they show up here the way they show up in other places, they park, they pay to park. And here we don't. So it's, it's a thing that we ought to do. And you mentioned council members talking to folks, and that has come up frequently in my conversations. In fact, the question I get is, why aren't we already doing it? Or
Right.
what's taking so long for us to do it?
Right. I think it's a topic worth certainly talking about. I think someone reminded me yesterday that it's the third rail of politics in town. I don't know how true it is. I haven't spoken with enough residents to know how much of a political issue is, but certainly some folks are going to have some opposition, but there's a big opportunity there. We have we're a destination economy, a destination town. There is an opportunity there that's worth exploring. In light of other things that we're doing as well, we've expanded parking opportunities at Cemetery. We're looking at expanding for recreational users. We're looking at an EV, at a pay to charge mechanism. So those are also have parking implications. I think that there are opportunities.
Do you have the space count for Dayton and Cemetery?
I do have the count. So just in the cemetery, we added over 50 parking spaces, and I'll create an itemized list of where the parking numbers are by lots.
Because again, that's my conversations with folks. I'm like, I don't know. I overestimated Cemetery though. That's it.
Okay.
80.
Well, how we can fit more than 50 just tightly packed, and there's some. We need to create enough of a ways for people to get in and out, right? So,
All right.
okay. Well,
Does
Mary
anyone
Ann,
have any other question? Comments?
I appreciate the council and the village manager looking at ways to bring in money versus higher costs for residents and property owners. And I think there's nothing wrong with looking at how you can cut back. When I was a teacher, we didn't get a raise for years. And we had to pay for our own paper. So we were looking at ways that we could take some of that expense away from property owners. And I would hope council will look at that.
thank you, Mincy. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Mary Ann, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate the support.
Yeah, I thought we were all expected to be here.
Good night.
Yeah.
Good night,
Thank you, everyone.